and the interpretation and repercussion of its main themes, in a sense. Mostly it's about the conflicting relationship that people have with science. Science has this good shining side of a pursuit of knowledge, of technological advances, and like all the things that can make our lives better. But science also has a sort of there is this visceral fear that science can impart in the public, particularly if the public are poorly informed. Things like, especially genetics, genetic modifications. That there's a lot of discussion on the Frankenstein article about all the ethical concerns, all the responsibilities of scientists and of the research institutions that support them.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Geekoscopy 101, the podcast that explores the intersection between science, story, and play with me, your host, Dr. Yanis Kisten. And today we're exploring geeky research, science communication, and geek culture with snail biologist and editor-in-chief at the Journal of Geek Studies, Dr. Rodrigo B. Salvador. Welcome to the show, Rodrigo. How are you doing?
Well, thank you very much. Fine, thank you. Still kind of work mostly from home. Thankfully, I'm able to do that. And thank you very much for having me here.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I was really excited about you guys' initiative with the Journal of Geek Studies, and something that I think if you guys didn't do it, I would have tried myself at some point. But it's a very fun and interesting thing. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do?
All right. So I could say I'm a human scholar, maybe lawful neutral, hopefully around level 10 by now. And
Yeah.
a little bit more seriously, I currently work at the Museum of New Zealand in Wellington. But I'm
Mm.
originally from Brazil, though. And here I'm a curator of invertebrate animals, so more specifically of molluscs. And as a museum curator, my job here is kind of divided into three parts. So the first thing, I take care of our natural history collections and improve them. I also conduct research. My case is with land snails. And finally, I also do science outreach, which can be like in the museum exhibition floors or online articles or blogs and etc. Or actually like this, like I'm doing right now.
Mm.
So thanks again for the opportunity.
I'm happy to have you. So how did you actually get into wanting to research, get into research and study snails and mollusks and things like that?
Well, it kind of happened a little bit naturally somehow. I mean, at least in the beginning, it was a rough start. When I started university, I was enrolled in engineering. So after one semester, I was completely fed up with it, thinking, man, I cannot possibly work with such boring stuff for the rest of my life. I'm very sorry about that if we have any engineers listening to us right now. To each their own,
Yeah.
I know, but really, that thing was not for me. So
Yeah.
I kind of changed it to
Mm.
biology. And I mean, I liked biology as a kid, but then I kind of lost touch with it along the way. And in university, I fell back in love with it. And like during university, when I was finishing my bachelor degrees, I decided to go on to a master's degree. Try to figure out how was the whole research thing. And it just went well for me, I think, because doing research means that you are always learning, always studying new things, always tackling different projects, working on your own favorite topics, and working to increase global scientific knowledge. You're just not working to make someone richer, for example.
Mm. Mm. For sure.
And after my master's, I went on to a PhD in Germany, and now here I am in Middle Earth.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you went like all over the world for your studies. Started out from Brazil, went to Europe. Now you're in New Zealand. Yeah, you've been all over. You don't spend any time in Africa. um, and how did you get into studying mollusks in specifically? Like, what inspired you to get into that field?
Oh, that was a little bit more roundabout. So I knew I wanted to work with fossils in the beginning. So that means I wanted to be a paleontologist. So I started during my undergrad years to work with bivalves. So I was researching bivalve biodiversity, fossil bivalves. They were back from the Permian period. And I mean, bivalves are mussels and clams for those people listening. And they are very common as fossils, and they are very abundant in Brazil. I was studying Brazilian species back then, but they are quite boring, you know. So I tried uh, dinosaurs instead, actually. So I went to Argentina
Okay.
for a couple of internships, and I took part in some projects about sauropod dinosaurs, you know, those like really long-necked ones.
Yeah.
And I participated on conferences, and then I had all the peer review process of, you know, when you submit your manuscript for to a scientific journal, you have the peer review process. And I started to realize that dinosaur paleontology was kind of a toxic environment in a sense, and still very colonialist also. So I ended up dropping it, and I moved on somehow to land snails. And I mean, because of their shells, the snail shells are made of calcium carbonate, so they are very durable. They fossilize very well. They become fossils very easily, and there's just plenty of them. And I started studying them, and I just thought they were amazing animals. I kind of, I mean, fell in love with them. I mean, they're biologically interesting. They are fun. Some of them are kind of cute, even. And then I just could not drop them.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, snails are pretty much everywhere. I mean, even like I have a snail shell here. Well, this is an aquatic snail shell. This is the abalone shell.
Oh yeah,
But they are pretty much everywhere, and they are really cool. I also enjoy snails, and like I said earlier, like to you, like I'm a mollusk fanboy, and I especially like cephalopods and octopi and cuttlefish and stuff like that. And it's also interesting because like when I started out, like when I was really young, I wanted to be a paleontologist as well. And when
all
I
right.
speak to my other like geeky friends, like I think a lot of kids, like when they're really young geeks and nerds, like their entryway into it is like dinosaurs. And like as they grow up, they kind of maybe change their minds when they find other interesting things. But it's kind of like, yeah, paleontology is one of those for geeks and nerds, like yeah, the entry point to the what do you call it, the gateway drug for geekery.
Yes, dinosaurs are
Which
the
is
gateway drug.
for sure, yes. I also love that kind of stuff. I fell out of it, and like I wouldn't. I remember seeing this meme on the internet, like with your knowledge about paleontology, and like when you're like 4, it's like really high, and then like drops, and then like if
Yes.
you then pursue it and become a professor, then it increases. Um,
Well,
and yeah,
that's
it's just
true
really
to
funny.
an extent, but I still think that many kids out there will know a lot more about dinosaurs than I do right now.
Yeah, me as well. Like I wouldn't be able to tell you. And like now, like the field has changed so much. I just like read a headline the other day about T-Rex and how they're thinking of changing it into 3 different species.
Oh yeah.
That the 3 different specimens that they have might be 3 different species, which is like interesting now. Because what we were calling T-Rex this whole time, maybe T something else. Um,
Yeah.
which is, I suppose, the interesting part about just studying science and biology in general, is things that are ever changing. Um, So, how did you get from studying the stuff to actually going towards science communication and outreach? Like, where along the way did you feel like there was a need for that and that you would enjoy doing that type of stuff?
So I always enjoyed the science communication part, talking to other people about science, not only about what I do, but about biology in general. And the whole question, why is this so important? Why science outreach is so important? It's that used to be rather difficult to answer, like in the past, to give an answer that would satisfy everyone. But it turns out that now, after COVID, we all have seen what a lack of science communication and science education can do. We have all this mistrust of science, from like regular people like us to deranged presidents out there. So the bottom line is that we must communicate science, our own research and scientific topics in general, and build back this trust with the public, like a mutual relationship that we can then pass on important information to them, transmit accurate scientific knowledge, facts, so people can better understand how things work. Sorry, to learn how to search for real information, to judge disinformation, and most importantly, to enable them to act in a conscious and informed manner. And that goes from things
Mm.
like very immediate things like wearing masks and vaccinating, to more medium or maybe long-term things like tackling environmental degradation, climate change. And just happens that biology has a central role in all of that, from the viruses and vaccines to ecosystems, biodiversity loss, and extinction. Not just other species extinction, but also our own, that will eventually catch up with us.
Mm. For sure, yeah. I also feel like it's quite an important thing because I think that for a long time, scientists have just been like communicating with each other, and we've developed this our own like language and our own like way of communicating that. But because it's become so technical and there's so much jargon, being able to translate that to an audience that's not part of their everyday life is really important. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to get the nuances that there's going to be that people need to make decisions for sure. And also, like, closing the economic loop, I think, is really important because a lot of tax money goes into creating science, and some of it needs to go back to the people who are actually
Yes,
paying for it. So I think that's also a big part of why science communication is important.
that's true.
Um,
That's a very good point. I mean, we scientists always had this sort of ivory tower behavior sort of thing.
mm,
And we are now, like, in the past decade or maybe 2 decades or so, we are starting to realize how important it is to communicate science. And even if the teams are very complex or there are lots of jargons involved, we can always kind of find a way to communicate that, because all of us, we started as non-scientists, so we were reading
mm,
things that were communicated to us in a reasonable,
mm,
understandable manner. So why can't we do that back now?
mm,
Closing
for
the
sure.
loop again, as you said.
Yeah, indeed. So one of your initiatives that's revolving around this, but it's also like it's kind of like a circular thing, is the Journal of Geek Studies, which I find amazing. How did that come about? Like, where did the idea start, and like, what is it exactly?
Well, it was an alignment of a few factors, I think. So back then, when we started, my wife and I were doing our PhDs in Europe, and we're just starting to become real scientists, so to speak. And we knew how important science communication was, and we wanted to do it somehow. But we did not want to just do more of the same, just write semi-boring, jargon-free version of our own research. Just
Mm.
just to check a list of things that we needed to do. Communicate
Mm.
science about our research. Okay, done. No, we wanted to add a little extra to it. To write about other interesting things that we liked, and eventually that brought back like memories of discussions we had during Dungeons and Dragons sessions, to back to nerd stuff from our teenage years or childhood years even. Things that go like, well, can a hippogriff carry a knight in full armor, or can the Flash actually do this? All those very important questions we had.
Mhm.
And then we ended up deciding to build a place in which we could do that mix of science communication and nerd stuff. And more importantly, we wanted to do that while maintaining full scientific rigor. We want to apply real science to those problems. And I mean, we have absolutely no skill or charisma to make videos, so we decided to go for writing.
Mm.
And in the beginning, we were thinking about doing a blog, starting with myself, my wife, and her brother.
Mm.
But the blog kind of seemed too personal, too restricting, and we wanted to have a platform not just for us. We wanted to have something that would be open to everyone, so like more people could write and contribute. And then we ended up transforming that blog idea into a online magazine of sorts. And that was how the Journal of Geek Studies was born. And we call it Journal to give it a more academic vibe, in a sense. And we ended up choosing our favorite Dungeons and Dragons monster as its symbol, the owlbear.
Mm. Yeah,
So
for sure.
that's the backstory.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really cool. I've looked at it, and it's like, yeah, it's really written up kind of like a scientific journal. Like there's instructions to authors, and there's overall kind of way that you need to write, and it is kind of set up in the way that you would, I suppose, interact with the scientific method, which is really cool. And like in the journal, there's stuff about like Pokemon and like all types of like Jurassic Park and stuff. So I think it's like really cool. And yeah, I think I'm probably going to be thinking about like submitting a paper at some point.
Oh,
Need to
definitely.
collaborate with some other people on it. But yeah, if you want to let's say look at like the taxonomy of like fish Pokemon or something, there's a paper for that in your journal.
Yes,
As
there
well
is one.
as there's all types of other stuff. So I think it's like the thing is like it's also like, what do you say, it's like it's definitely referencing for people who are already academics. So like people who are already academics who kind of like understand, but how do you then try and get like lay people involved with that type of stuff, or is it not for them, or like how do you hook them into it as well?
So yeah, we try to be like as much as we can. We tend to avoid jargons. We tend to write lighter texts and like that are easily understandable. Of course, if we need to use jargon, we will fully explain it. But each author is doing its own thing in a sense. So when I write, I always try to be as informal as possible with my articles, but we have authors that prefer to stick to a more structured sort of text. And I mean, to each their own, all our articles end up finding a public out there. Some of them fare better, some of them fare worse, but all of them have circulated out there. They have found their public. And I think that's great actually. It's
Hmm.
working in a sense.
Yeah, for sure. um yeah, for sure. So do you guys actually like do the whole like peer review process again? Because like
Oh
yeah,
no, no.
if it's okay, so how does it work with you guys? How does it work normally, and then how does it work with you guys?
All right. So in a like an actual scientific journal, you would have the peer review process when you submit your article, and the editor will send out for two, sometimes three or four external reviewers to read your article and make comments, see if it like your methodology is okay, if your I don't know if your statistics are okay, if you're following the scientific method, and so on. And then it will come back with comments, and then you fix your article, and then send it again to the editor until it is accepted for publication. So it's a way of ensuring that when the article, a scientific article, is out there, it can be trusted in a way. But because we are a science communication magazine, we don't do the whole peer review system, especially because it would just scare off all the authors, I think,
Yeah.
in a way. But we do have some checking, some basic quality checking. So when we receive an article, we just go over it, see if it's understandable for anyone, especially for people who are not of that area. So if I receive an article about a fish Pokemon biology, it needs to be understandable to everyone. Doesn't matter what you do. And especially with more difficult topics like physics, genetics, those tend to be trickier. So we need to make sure that everything is well explained, that the article have lots of figures to visually show things. And it's a sort of quality control. It's not a full peer review, and we tend not to impose things on the authors, but we end up asking for, hey, can you explain this a little bit better, because it's like not everyone will have this background knowledge, this sort of thing. So we give hints some now and then.
So I suppose it's more on the kind of like science journalism side of
Yes,
the
yes.
than it is. Yeah.
Yeah, no, not the
Makes
content.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which kind of makes sense. Otherwise, you guys be like rejecting people left and right as well, like the normal process
No.
does. Yeah.
Actually, we received a number of serious papers that were
That's
meant
interesting.
for serious scientific journals, and we ended up receiving
Okay.
them. So those we had to reject, because I
You
mean
had
we
to
cannot
reject.
publish.
That's super interesting. That is interesting. Yeah, I suppose. So, like, what type of papers were there? Like, was it like
Ah,
psychology papers and stuff like that?
there was a mix of stuff. There was a psychology one. There was like a statistics mathematics one. I have actually,
Oh
to this day, I
wow,
have no
jeez.
idea what it was about. I mean, all
Interesting.
sorts of things, like all over the place. It's not just one specific discipline or another.
Yeah, yeah. But were they like geek related in any way, or were they just like trying their
No,
luck or
they were
something?
actually serious papers. I have no idea
Yeah,
why we ended up receiving them.
that is wild. Jeez, I don't know. It's like, yeah, maybe it's like some algorithm that was like just trying to get it everywhere, just
Could
trying to
be.
get it into. So like, yeah, I mentioned like some of my highlights for what I've seen in your catalog. I still need to go through it properly. But like, what were some of your favorite things that you published in the journal so far?
Uh, I think my very favorite article in the journal is it's called Frankenstein: The Beauty and Terror of Science, I think, and it's about Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, and the interpretation and repercussion of its main themes. In a sense, mostly it's about the conflicting relationship that people have with science. You know, science has this good shining side of a pursuit of knowledge, of technological advances, and like all the things that can make our lives better. But science also has a sort of there is this visceral fear that science can impart in the public,
Mm.
particularly if the public are poorly informed. Things like especially genetics, genetic modifications. That there's a lot of discussion on the Frankenstein article about all the ethical concerns, all the responsibilities of scientists and of the research institutions that support them. And you see that the fun thing, or the sad thing, I don't know, is that Shelley's book was published in 1818, so it's more than 200 years ago. And we are
Mm.
still grappling with those same problems, the damages that
Mm.
fear and misinformation and conspiracies that are out there. So if people have to read one in just one article in the Journal of Geek Studies, that's the one.
Hey, I'll put it on my to-do list right after this this episode. Yeah, for sure. I think it's kind of I think it's just part of the human experience. Um, yeah, it's always, I think, just being a human, there's always going to be variability in how people like react to things, and the yeah, when it comes to like science, like you said, there's like ivory tower stuff going on. There's like classism, and when that happens, people start looking at each other like as the other, and there's like low trust or fear that arises, and that to a degree is just due to, I suppose, education. People just don't understand certain things, or how certain things work. But then it's just on the onus of those people to educate and make people, or try to make people understand about how certain things work. And then it's not all like doom and gloom all the time. And
You
yeah,
know?
it's just, yeah, for sure.
Yes.
How,
So moving on a little bit from the gloomy side of things, another one of my favorites in the journal is an article that studied the length of the titles of Japanese light novels. So the light novels in Japan, they're very famous, or rather infamous, maybe, for having
yeah,
these really
yeah,
long
long
titles that are
title. Yeah,
actually
yeah,
full sentences, like "I died and
yeah,
was reincarnated as so and so
yeah,
in a
yeah,
world of this and that, and just want to get back to Tokyo to open up a bakery or something." So that would be
yeah,
a feasible light novel title.
yeah,
And
yeah,
in this article, the author applied some real statistics to measure the length of the titles. And he discovered that there is indeed an increasing length over the years, and
yeah,
that the
yeah.
tipping point of it was around the year of 2010. So that's when things started to
2010.
get out of hand.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting.
So
That's
that's
really
a fun
fun.
article.
Yeah.
We're not all doom and gloom.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is really fun. Yeah, it's a thing. I think just because of the sheer number of like light novels and manga and stuff that comes out, in order to stick out, you gotta like kind of describe your story in the title.
Yeah,
That
it's
has
kind of
been
like the
increasing over
abstract.
time. Yeah, yeah, it's kind of like an abstract in the title, so it's like a whole like story, and I suppose that's what gets people to like buy it off the shelf, which is interesting. I wonder where, um, yeah, well, like you said, there was a tipping point in 2010. I think that's about the time like stuff like Sword Art Online and stuff was coming out. Yeah, so yeah, maybe it's just because like imagery just became too samey. Like if you like just look at manga and anime art, like a lot of it looks the same. It's like difficult now to pick
Yes.
out, especially like within genre, uh, which art like belongs to which stories. Maybe that's why the things changed. But I need to, maybe it's in the article. I need to read it to see what the
Yes,
conclusions
and I
are.
mean, at some point, all the good titles will be gone. It's like the band names. At some point, all the good
Yeah,
names are taken, so you just have to come up with longer names.
yeah, yeah, for sure, definitely. Very interesting, for sure. I think, yeah, I'm gonna check those two out, put them on my to-do list. So like going forward, how would you like the Journal of Geek Studies to like develop any further, or is it like just this format that you guys are gonna go for? Would you like to start publishing certain types of like serious stuff? Um, yeah, what are you guys looking forward to?
So right now we are kind of, how can I put, we just want to attract more people,
Mm,
more varied people to write for us. So that's the first step. And in consequence, with more people writing for us, I hope we can reach an even broader audience who's interested in our
mm,
stuff. And I think that more than that, by using those geek things that we love so much, that we care so much about, I hope we can kind of spark an interest in science in people. Sometimes, uh, I mean, going back again when we were kids, when we were teenagers, we were like watching a sci-fi movie, reading a comic, and sometimes there are little things that might spark an interest in science that you can use to start a sort of conversation and like getting people interested in it. And I hope we are doing that in a way.
mm. For sure. I think yeah, it's sometimes just having like simple goals is better than overcomplicating it. For sure, and sticking to the basics. Yeah, it would be interesting though to start accepting like serious papers that are around like geeky things, like reviewing video games and stuff. But I mean, nowadays, serious journals do accept stuff like that, so it's
Yeah, there
not.
are there are actual journals doing that sort of thing. And
Yes.
I mean, I think we could accept those types of papers as serious academic papers, but then things might get mixed with the
Mixed
science
up.
communication. Yeah,
Yeah. Mm,
so it would be difficult, might get difficult for the public to find what they are looking for. If
mm.
they arrive there and there is like an overly complicated analysis of, I don't know, video game sales along the years,
Yeah.
instead of just
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
fun Pokemon article, it might put people off, and it might also be bad for the academics themselves. If they have in their CV like a serious article published in the Journal of Geek Studies, some panels
Yeah.
in the universities or in grant agencies might look at what the
Yeah.
hell is this?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Do you ever think about like hosting a conference around
Oh, that
this?
would be nice. Yeah, at some point it
Mm.
would be really cool to do something like that.
Mm. That'd be really
So what
cool.
we are trying to do now is to get like a whole volume that is just around one topic. So like a special issue
Like a
of sorts.
special issue. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. That's really cool. Do you have a topic in mind, or are you just waiting until
We do. We
you
are
know?
we are trying to get something ready for next year. But I
Okay.
won't talk any more about that because that will be a spoiler.
Yeah. Stay tuned to the Journal of Geek Studies.
Stay tuned. Yes.
So yeah, so like you have your existence firmly rooted in both sides of like academia and geek culture. What from your personal experience and also like have you seen with other people? Like what are some of the similarities between those two different kinds of people that enables like people like us to exist where like we work both sides of that line?
That's a tough one. I think
Yeah.
it's natural. There is a lot of scientists who are also geeks. Or I mean, to be more accurate, people were geek before they became scientists. So
Mm,
in many cases, it was something like, I don't know, Star Trek, maybe Star Wars, that led people to become scientists. Indiana Jones, those sorts of things.
mm,
And at least by my personal experience, there is a sort of cutting line around 50 years old, give or take. So over 50, people will look at me and say, why are you doing this thing? But people younger than that, they are more in touch with things like back to like Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, the classics, and to more trendier stuff like the MCU, Pokemon, and even to very niche anime and Japanese RPGs. So there are lots of people out there, lots of different people with different interests, and sometimes they just don't align, I think. And I mean, or you also have the other way around, that science is starting to be invaded by geek stuff in a sense.
Hmm.
So, for instance, if you look at the name of things like names of species or names of genes or molecules, you have lots of references to Tolkien, to Star Wars, to video games, those sorts of things. So that there is a good overlap between the serious
Hmm.
science and the geek realm, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I've I've had like this idea in the back of my head for videos about like references to like molecules and stuff. I know there's a Pikachuran, which
Yes.
is a neuro, like a neural pathway, but because it's so fast, it's like lightning. And there was a molecule, was it a protein or an enzyme that was named after Sonic the Hedgehog, but I
Oh
think it got
yes.
changed recently, which was sad.
Oh, that's
uh, yeah, for sure. And nowadays you do get species names with like Pokemon species names and yeah, all types of things. I think yeah, that is. I think the way things are being named now is influenced a lot more by pop and geek culture, I think, than they were before, which is interesting. For sure,
it,
yeah. I mean, I'd okay, continue.
sorry. I mean, it is interesting, but in a sense, this has kind of always happened. With I'm talking about the species names, for instance, because that's like close to my own area of work. And you go back to like the 1800s and 1900s, and you have some species named after like characters from the books back then, from Charles Dickens, that sort of thing. Those
Mhm.
things were sort of the pop culture back then, so this was already
Yeah,
happening.
yeah, yeah, for sure. It's. I think we don't think about it because it's always like it's always like far out, like from our generation versus like previous generations. But it's like right now, like we are creating like our own like mythologies and stuff that future like generations would look back and be like, oh, that's like old ancient stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
the episode
someday
that will be
someone
out
will look at Pikachu and say, "Oh, this is one of the classics."
these classics, exactly. Yeah. So the episode before this, I interviewed a mythology researcher, and she says like this: the video games and stuff, and the stuff that we watch right now is like no different from like ancient mythology. It's just that we're experiencing it right now. That's why it
Yes,
feels different.
yes,
Um,
exactly.
so yeah, so yeah, like in a couple of decades, stuff that's happening right now will be classics, and like even we refer to like early like video games and early like geek culture stuff as classic now,
Oh yeah,
but it's gonna like become like historical stuff, which feels weird to say.
yeah, yeah. It's weird to
Um,
think about it, but it will happen eventually.
yeah, for sure. Um, so, Rodrigo, it's been a fun chat. I'm sure we can go on for hours talking about this type of stuff, and I'm sure I'll have you on the next time you publish an article or two in your journal. So, where can we find the journal and all of your work on the internet? If people want to look forward for you.
So the Journal of Geek Studies can be found at jgeekstudies.org. So pretty straightforward. And there you find all our original content, all our articles, and we also have lots of interviews, especially with game developers, like video games and board games, like tabletop games as well. And you also find on our website how to prepare and submit your article to us if you're so inclined. Who knows? And we are also on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. But in our social media, besides our own stuff, we also post links to news and articles from other sources that have that right mix of geek and science.
For sure, I recommend you guys go check it out.